Friends, there's something we rarely talk about. Something that lurks in the shadows of every human heart. You know what I'm referring to. That moment when anger surges through you like molten lava. When you catch yourself harboring thoughts of revenge against someone who wronged you. When jealousy gnaws at your chest like a hungry beast. Perhaps it's that flash of satisfaction you feel when someone you dislike fails. Or the cruel words that form in your mind before you catch yourself. We live in a culture obsessed with positivity, where we're told to think good thoughts and manifest light. But what happens to all those darker impulses that arise naturally in the human psyche? Do we pretend they don't exist? Do we suppress them until they explode in destructive ways? Or do we indulge them and risk becoming the very monsters we fear? This struggle isn't new. Everyone. 20 centuries ago, a Roman emperor sat in his tent on the battlefield, wrestling with the same darkness that haunts us today. Marcus Aurelius knew rage, knew the desire for revenge, knew the pull of cruelty that power could afford him. Yet he became one of history's most respected philosophers precisely because he learned something remarkable: how to acknowledge the darkness within without being consumed by it. What if I told you that the key to inner peace isn't eliminating these shadow aspects of yourself, but learning to dance with them? What if the path to wisdom runs not around the darkness, but straight through it? Friends, have you ever noticed how the more we try to suppress our darker thoughts and emotions, the stronger they seem to become? It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. The pressure builds until it explodes to the surface with even greater force. We exhaust ourselves fighting against parts of our own nature, creating an internal civil war that leaves us depleted and divided. The Stoics understood something profound about human psychology that modern self-help culture often misses entirely. They recognized that we are not pure beings of light, nor are we creatures of pure darkness. We are complex, multifaceted beings capable of both tremendous compassion and terrible cruelty, profound wisdom and stunning foolishness, selfless love and bitter hatred. Epictetus, who knew the depths of human cruelty through his own experience as a slave, taught us that our goal isn't to become emotionless automatons, but to become conscious observers of our own inner landscape. In his discourses, he reminds us, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. But here's what many people miss. This includes how we react to our own dark thoughts and emotions. Marcus Aurelius, writing in his meditations during the brutal Marcomannic Wars, demonstrated this principle beautifully. He didn't pretend to be above anger, frustration, or darker impulses. Instead, he wrote, how much trouble he avoids who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does, but only to what he does himself. He was acknowledging the very human tendency toward judgment, comparison, and even malice, while choosing to redirect his attention toward his own character and actions. The first step in embracing your darkness without being consumed by it is radical self-awareness. When anger arises, instead of immediately judging yourself as bad for feeling it, pause and observe. What triggered this emotion? What story are you telling yourself about the situation? What does this anger reveal about your values and attachments? Seneca, in his essay on anger, provides us with a masterclass in this approach. He doesn't deny that anger is a natural human response. He acknowledges it as temporary madness. But he teaches us to catch anger in its earliest stages, to examine it like a scientist studying a fascinating but dangerous specimen. The greatest remedy for anger is delay, he writes. Not suppression, not denial, but conscious postponement, while we investigate what's really happening within us. When darker thoughts arise, jealousy, resentment, vindictive fantasies, the Stoic approach is neither to feed them nor to frantically push them away. Instead, we acknowledge them as temporary visitors in the inn of our consciousness. We don't have to serve them dinner or invite them to stay, but we don't need to fight them at the door either. We can simply observe. Ah, jealousy is here. How interesting. What is this teaching me about what I value or fear losing? The ancient Stoics practiced what they called prosochi, continuous attention to the present moment and to our internal states. This isn't meditation in the modern sense, but a kind of ongoing psychological vigilance. Throughout the day, they would check in with themselves. What am I thinking? What am I feeling? What am I choosing in this moment? When you notice darker emotions arising, try this Stoic exercise. Instead of asking, how do I get rid of this feeling? Ask, what is this feeling trying to tell me? Anger often reveals our values. We get angry when something we care about is threatened or violated. Jealousy reveals our insecurities and our attachments. Resentment shows us where we're carrying old wounds that need attention. The practice of voluntary discomfort, which the Stoics called poverty rehearsals, applies here as well. Just as they would deliberately experience cold, hunger, or simple living to build physical resilience, we can deliberately face our psychological shadows to build emotional resilience. This might mean honestly examining our prejudices, acknowledging our capacity for selfishness, or confronting the ways we contribute to problems we complain about. But here's the crucial point. Acknowledging our darkness isn't the same as acting on it. Marcus Aurelius may have felt the urge for brutal revenge against his enemies, but he chose to act with justice and mercy. Seneca may have experienced greed and envy, but he chose to practice generosity and contentment. The gap between feeling and action is where our freedom lives, where our character is forged, where we prove ourselves to be rational beings rather than mere animals driven by impulse. The Stoics taught that every negative emotion is based on a false judgment about what is truly good or bad for us. Anger assumes that someone has the power to truly harm what matters most. Jealousy assumes that someone else's success diminishes our own worth. Fear assumes that external circumstances control our well-being. By examining these underlying judgments, we can begin to question whether they're actually true. Consider this powerful refrain from Marcus Aurelius. Whenever you want to cheer yourself, consider the good qualities of your companions. He's not denying that people can be frustrating, selfish, or cruel. Instead, he's choosing to direct his attention toward what serves his own peace of mind and moral development. This isn't naive optimism. It's strategic wisdom. When we truly embrace our shadow without being consumed by it, something remarkable happens. We become more compassionate toward others. When we acknowledge our own capacity for cruelty, we can respond to others' cruelty with understanding rather than self-righteous indignation. When we recognize our own selfishness, we can forgive others' selfishness more easily. When we see our own fears and insecurities, we can offer genuine empathy to others who are struggling with theirs. This doesn't mean we become doormats or that we excuse harmful behavior, our own or others. The Stoics were fierce advocates for justice and virtue, but they understood that true strength comes from acting with clarity and wisdom, rather than from the blind fury of righteous anger or the bitter satisfaction of revenge. Seneca wrote, "Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end." Our dark emotions often signal that something in our lives needs to end. Perhaps an old way of thinking, an attachment that no longer serves us, a relationship that has become toxic, or a part of our identity that we've outgrown. Instead of seeing these emotions as enemies to be defeated, we can see them as messengers carrying important information about what needs to change. The practice of amor fati, love of fate, extends even to our own psychological shadows. We can learn to love the completeness of our humanity, including the parts that make us uncomfortable. This doesn't mean celebrating our worst impulses, but rather accepting that having them is part of the human condition, and that learning to work with them wisely is part of our path to wisdom. When you find yourself in the grip of a dark emotion, try this stoic technique. Imagine yourself as a general surveying a battlefield. You don't panic at the sight of enemy troops. You assess the situation, understand the terrain, consider your options, and make strategic decisions. Your dark emotions are not you. They're temporary conditions that you can observe, understand, and respond to with wisdom, rather than reactivity. The ultimate goal isn't to become a person who never experiences darkness, but to become a person who can hold both light and shadow with equanimity, who can act with virtue regardless of what storms are raging within, who can transform even their worst impulses into opportunities for growth and wisdom. True strength, fellow seekers of wisdom, isn't found in the denial of our shadow selves, but in the conscious integration of all aspects of our humanity. It's the recognition that we can acknowledge our capacity for darkness without being defined by it, that we can feel the full spectrum of human emotions without being enslaved by it. The person who has learned to embrace their darkness without being consumed by it becomes truly free, free from the exhausting pretense of false perfection, free from the fear of their own nature, free to choose their actions based on wisdom rather than impulse. They become, in the words of Marcus Aurelius, like a rocky headland on which the waves constantly break. It stands firm, and round it the seething waters are laid to rest. So I ask you, what aspects of your own nature have you been fighting against or trying to hide? What would it look like to acknowledge these parts of yourself with curiosity, rather than judgment? Are you ready to discover the freedom that comes from accepting the fullness of your humanity while choosing to act from your highest values? May the light of wisdom illuminate your inner citadel. Until next time.